कई मौसम अनुभव किया मैंने। हालात बदले, लोग बदले, अगर कुछ नहीं बदला तो बाबूजी की सिखाई हुई एक बात, वो कहते थे जब नींव मजबूत हो तो फिर चाहे वक्त के उतार चढ़ाव कैसे भी हो, हम उनका डट कर सामना करने में सक्षम होंगे। बिल्कुल इस पेड़ की तरह ऐसा ही एक अटूट रिश्ता जोड़ता है आपके साथ IDFC फर्स्ट बैंक। विश्वास, पारदर्शिता और सच्चाई का, क्योंकि इनको आपकी सफलता में अपनी जीत दिखती। मैं तो जुड़ चुका हूं इनके साथ, आप भी जुड़ जाइए ना। IDFC First Bank, always you first.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Outlook Business Leading Edge 2021, brought to you by IDFC First Bank. Today, we have a masterclass with Kristen Cox. Kristen Cox is world's leading authority on how to apply the theory of constraints to governments and non-profits. She's perhaps best known for her work as a former executive director of the Governor's Office of Management and Budget for the state of Utah, where she orchestrated a 35% improvement across Utah's $20 billion executive branch. Chris is currently the executive director of a new initiative on government improvement and adjunct instructor at the University of Utah's Eccles School of Business. He's the co-author of 2 books, Stop Decorating the Fish and The World of Decorating the Fish. Thank you, Kristen, for joining us today.
All right, thanks so much. It's a real honor to be here with the Outlook Business team. I'm super impressed with what you guys do, so it's a real honor to be here. Just for the participants, I am blind, and so I'm trying to look at the camera, but if my eyes shift, that's why, just so FYI. I want to start this whole discussion today about a personal journey I was on running one of the largest agencies in the state. And I learned a lot, and this really changed my paradigm and how to approach what we're going to talk about today, which is solving the right problem. I was working with the state agency, and they were in the business of making determinations if people were eligible for benefits or not. And hundreds of millions of dollars ran through that system. And this happens all across the country in the United States. Similar systems, governments having to determine if somebody's eligible for benefits or not. And they had just purchased a $200 million new IT system, and it promised them the world. At the time, their employees were working out of 5 separate legacy systems. They had not integrated the latest technology, and the folks were not using what was called a rules-based system, meaning they'd have to manually put in all of the information about the client and to make the determination manually. This new IT system promised to do that all for them, just to run the calculations behind the scenes, pop out an answer. Sounds great, doesn't it? You can have your workers working in one system, not 5. The computer system will make the decision for you. And so they went forward and implemented a $200 million piece of technology. And again, this is happening all across the country. But the question is that the right problem to solve? It's alluring, it's sophisticated. The tech sector can promise us the world, but is that the problem to solve? I want to show you a slide here, which is really important. At the time, it was taking this certain agency 30 days to make a decision if somebody was eligible for a benefit or not. The computer system, though, was only focused on the 30 minutes it really took to make the decision. If you had everyone's information, everything, income statements, what kind of jobs they had, anything you needed, you could sit there and make the decision. It'd take you 30 minutes. The computer system for $200 million was taking the 30 minutes maybe down to 20 minutes, a little more convenient, a little quicker around the edges, but didn't touch the 30 days. This was so powerful when we worked through this and understood this issue, because they were solving the wrong problem. And this is such a big issue because we are bombarded every day with problems to solve. And the trick between great leaders and those who are mediocre is they know what problem to solve. Now, when we learned this lesson, the agency I was running, I was working with the state, I took over at an agency that had this similar type of issue. And they had just purchased a big piece of technology and the same problems. They were chasing a lot of interesting problems, not solving the right one. When we help them understand what's the right problem to solve, which is to shorten the elapsed time, the time somebody's in the system, because when they're in the system waiting for a decision, they make phone calls, you have to have call centers, it creates this whole slew of overhead. When we solve the right problem, this is what our results. Our caseloads went up by 60%. It was right during the Great Recession here in the United States. So people's need for assistance went up significantly. But we were able to absorb a 60% increase in workload, while our cost for just this one system went from 80 million to 50 million. And we became one of the top 10 in the country on quality. Our decisions were accurate. This was my journey into really understanding that the problem we solve will determine our impact. And it's not easy, but it's so, so critical. My co-author and I, Dr. Ishai Ashla, compared notes between private sector and public sector and realized that the same challenge of understanding what problem to solve is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. And here's some really important points I want to make today that are key takeaways from the book that we wrote. And the first one is that most problems aren't worth solving. I know that's hard to believe because we're almost validated and rewarded by how many problems we can fix, how many plates we can keep spinning in the air, how busy we are. And that's how we're almost rewarded. So this is the trick, to understand that most problems aren't worth solving. And if you start there, it's half of the journey. The other key thing to really think about is the breakthrough results we want, these leaps in performance. It doesn't happen by chasing new solutions. It happens when we reframe the problem. And that early example, it wasn't about implementing a new cool piece of technology. It was about shortening the 30 days, what we call the elapsed time. When you reframe the problem, you actually have a fighting chance of making a big difference in the performance that you have. I want to give you another example about this when it comes to a private sector retailer that was it's a fashion retailer, very big here in the United States. There was a group in this retail space, a group of individuals that really thought the problem to solve was to improve their forecasting model. So they invested a lot of energy and time and staff resources into improving their forecasts, looking at what the trends would be, even the microclimates, what the economy would look like, demographics of the customers they'd serve, predicting what their customers would want to buy in the next year, because the fashion season, they were looking a year in advance to what people would want to purchase. And so they wanted to improve their forecast. Is that the problem to solve though? It sounds like, yeah, that would be great. I'd love to know what people want to buy way into the future. But the question is, can we really know that? Another company named Zara reframed the problem. They understood that the problem wasn't improving the forecast. It was really shortening the supply chain. Meaning, when the season of clothing came out, they could react in real time to what their customers wanted and liked. Then they could make that clothing and get it into the store within 2 weeks versus 6 months with other retailers who are trying to predict the model, and they would have try to predict and then purchase 6 months in advance what they hope people would purchase. Zara reframed it. They wanted to know in real time what their customers wanted and decrease the supply chain. And if you look at Zara's results compared to the industry, it's amazing. 12% profitability versus 4%, 85% of their inventory is sold at full price, while the industry has to put 65% or 35% of their product on sale because they couldn't predict it and couldn't reduce the supply chain. So when we reframe the problem, we get a huge opportunity, because if you think about this, strategy is only the direction of a solution. And if you don't know the problem, you can't have a good solution. Now, another thing to think about this is the problem is only the problem within the context of the goal, right? So every problem isn't important. It's the problem that's blocking us, that's limiting us from achieving the goal. That's the problem that we need to focus on. I use this example, I think it's really important. A man named Chuck Yeager in the 1940s wanted to travel faster than the speed of sound, right? It wasn't possible back then. A very specific goal. As he was trying to achieve this amazing goal, he and his team and a bunch of engineers, as he would take off into the plane, they would start to fly. And as he went faster, the plane would create sound waves. Because he was traveling slower than the speed of sound, those sound waves would move in front of the plane and create what we now call a sound barrier. Those sound waves would create a lot of instability for the plane, a lot of drag, and make it impossible to travel faster than the speed of sound. It wasn't until they understood their goal and they tried to achieve it that they hit the limitation. the thing that was blocking them, and that was the sound barrier. And that became the problem to solve, to design a plane that could push through the sound barrier and allow them to achieve their goal. That's always the problem to solve. And I can't tell you how often when I'm working with organizations, there isn't clarity on that one thing. And we could talk for a whole hour just about the traps in setting the wrong goals and how do we set goals that can really uncover our limitation, our problem. Final point on this that I really want to hone in is that there is a massive opportunity cost when we do not understand what the problem is that we want to solve and need to solve to achieve our goal. Organizations can spend time and money and energy chasing all of the wrong problems, getting marginal improvements, and we've disappointed our shareholders, our employees, and our customers. And I saw this happen so much when I was just recently working for our governor here and managing the budget for the state of Utah, is people would come in asking for more money, and they wanted to buy more technology or a new data system, or they wanted a whole new training, or they needed to hire more people. And I would start seeing these patterns of people jumping to a solution without understanding the problem they were trying to solve. And there was a huge cost to this. People who needed services weren't getting them. Businesses that needed permits weren't getting them in time. And yet they kept spending money and energy and strategic plans, and nothing was moving. So I started creating this list of what we call the seductive 7. And these are solutions that organizations jump to without understanding the real problem. And you can see them listed here. I'll see if I can list them in order. I don't know how they're listed here, but we jump for more money. We believe that we're as good as we can get, and our only way out is to get more resources. We jump to more data, thinking that the data will reveal the answer to us instead of us asking the right questions, knowing what the questions are, and then we can use data to refute or validate our hypothesis. We jump to more reorganizations. I see this all the time. If I just move the org chart around, somehow the problem will go away. In the meantime, we've wasted so much time of our employees and created stress and friction point. We've moved the problem, we haven't solved it. We think we need more technology. Technology can be powerful, but it's just a tool. The question is, how can technology solve a very clear problem? For example, the example I gave to all of you earlier, reducing the elapsed time, for example. So technology by itself doesn't solve our problem. It can help amplify our solution, but it's just a tool. Or we see organizations think we just need more training. It's a lack of information. If our employees were just trained, they would do the right thing. What we don't ask ourselves is, why is it impossible for them to do the jobs that we want them to do within the current structure of our system? How we pay them, the process itself, how we give them time to actually do their work without interruption. So we try to train people and we think it's a lack of knowledge. How many of us know we shouldn't eat sugar and still eat sugar, right? So lack of knowledge usually isn't the issue. We want to look a little bit deeper into how we're designing our systems and our processes. We often think we need a new idea, which is a new strategic plan, right? We fail to execute our old plan very well. So somehow a new idea is going to solve everything when we haven't even executed well on our old promise. So we really believe new strategy, you need it once in a while, but all the innovation happens in execution. And the final one that I think is so important is this idea of blaming. That I can't make an impact because my boss won't let me. I can't make an impact because of my board. I can't make an impact because my employees don't have buy-in. I can't make an impact because the legislature won't approve my budget. Really understanding the core problem begins with, what do we already have stewardship over? What are we already responsible for? And if we can do really well with what we already own, then we can start expanding our circle of influence. I saw this a lot. I see this a lot in government. It's very easy for states to blame the federal government for us not being able to, make a difference with vaccinations, for example. But when you look at how states in many cases have been rolling out vaccinations and not having the right infrastructure in place, things they could control, they ignored that and waited for somebody else to solve their problem. So blaming is really just fundamental, that we have to assume that we can make an impact with the resources and responsibilities we have. And these are so pervasive. I really encourage you, as you go back to your work environments or to your teams, just watch these. You'll see these play out. People want a new data integration system. Somehow that'll solve all the problems. It always begins with what's your goal and what's blocking you from achieving your goal. And when you know those two things clearly, with clarity, which is sometimes so hard, simple is not always easy. But when we have clarity on the problem we need to solve, that is half the battle, at least half the battle, if not more of it. And I want to end with a personal story, and then we can open it up for Q&A. When I was going blind, it was a lot of people around me, a lot of professionals believed that lack of vision was the problem, right? So at the beginning, they would have me use magnifying glasses and large prints and everything to do to compensate for my lack of vision. The reality is, losing my vision was a fact of life. There wasn't much I could do about it. And I was so lucky to come across a mentor of mine who just changed my life. He was blind, one of the smartest men I've ever known. And he reframed the problem. He said, Kristen, the lack of vision isn't the problem. It's the mindset. It's the negative stereotypes. And if you can think differently about your blindness, you'll see that it's not really a tragedy. It's an inconvenience. You can learn Braille. There's lots of ways to access information. You don't just need your eyes. You can listen, you can talk, you can hear, you can use Braille. There's lots of cane travel, lots of ways to be independent. So quit relying on lack of vision as your excuse. That shift, that one shift in reframing the problem made the difference between me having the life I have today and the life I was having many, many years ago. So, I want to close it with that, and we can spend a lot of time talking through these, but if there's one takeaway you come from this, is your breakthrough will happen through reframing the problem, not by jumping to new solutions. And with that, ML, I'm open for questions and discussion.
Thank you so much, Christine. That was truly a very insightful and precise talk. And as much as your idea of not getting seduced by the seductive seven, it's very, very unique and interesting. But the fact post-COVID especially is that digitalization has really got accelerated, and every company today is forced to think about more technology, more data, more strategic thinking, more training and skilling, and reorganizing. And these are really the top 5 in your seductive 7 list. So, of course, you articulated that the fundamental question that companies really need to ask is what is your ultimate goal? And then everything flows from there. Can you nail this down further to some questions that you need to ask to really rephrase or frame your problem statement correctly so that you don't get carried away by what is becoming a very necessary tool for business?
And what's tricky about the seductive 7, it's not that we don't use them or need them. I use technology all the time. I use data, but they're tactics in our solution, right? They by themselves are not the solution. And so there's a few steps I think that are really important to go through. One, to realize that the seductive 7, stop. We always talk about start by stopping. We have limited time, we have limited capacity, and we always want to start new things. What we're saying is start with stopping. Know that these seductive 7 can give you, they're like individual ingredients in the recipe, but they by themselves aren't the recipe, right? So that's the first thing. Let's talk about the goal though for a second. And this one is really important. And there's some traps we see people fall into when they're making their goal. And if they get that wrong, finding the problem becomes impossible. So one, and this was really huge, both in public sector and private sector. We believe in giving before you get, and that is your goal is about what are you going to give to your client or what are you going to give to your customer, not what am I going to get. And in the private sector, we have to be profitable, right? We have to be profitable, but long-term profitability and value starts with what am I going to do for the customer? What limitation am I removing for the customer? And if I start with that, the value proposition for the customer, not just managing my stock price, but managing my value in my company, I'll start to actually pivot how I approach the issue. I just recently wrote an article about IBM, and there's some interesting research with that. And you can see IBM used to be the global tech giant in the country years ago, and it's the second largest company in the world. It's now 54th. Stock prices have just stagnated. Why? They started to have very inward focused goals about earnings per share, stock prices, very short-term goals, and stopped investing in R&D. While their competition, Intel, Microsoft, ramped up their R&D so they could continually find ways to add value, IBM became very inward focused. Now they've changed leaders. We'll see what happens as they've amped up their investments in AI and quantum. But again, what's the purpose of AI? You know, they've got to make sure AI is solving a problem for their customer, not just a cool new sexy technology. So it always comes back to making sure your goal is about what are you going to give, not just what you're going to get. And that by itself helps to start uncover the real problem that we want to solve. There's a couple, just like one more, there's a few traps about setting the goal, but I want to talk about one more. The other one I see agencies and organizations get mixed up in all the time is they confuse the means with the end, right? So they want to go digital and digitize their system. And again, technology right now, remote work right now, we're using technology, but this technology we're using is removing a very real limitation for us. We can't get together. This removes that so we can get together. When we confuse the means with the end, going digital, that's a strategy. That's not the outcome. What do we get out of that? I was working with an agency a couple of years ago that had this want to go digital and put everything electronic. What we realized though is most of what they wanted to digitize wasn't necessary when they reframed the goal and the problem. The goal was to make it simple for people to process this paperwork, right? The question was all the paperwork necessary? The answer was no. We could strip out most of the paperwork that they wanted to digitize, and then they could digitize a little bit and change the actual process and get a significant breakthrough because they understood what their goal was. So confusing the means with the end and having goals about what we're going to get versus what we can give are really important steps in understanding the problem to solve.
So there's another question. You give this beautiful example about creating awareness about recycling alone, not delivering results without financial incentives being aligned towards reducing new plastic in your book. Can you tell us at an enterprise level, do you really see training and communication hurting companies in any way? And where do you know when and where do you really put a stop to training and communication and say we are overdoing this?
Yeah, that's a great question because you know, sharing knowledge is, you know, we're doing that right now. It's not inherently bad, but what it tends to do is it tends to put the burden on our employees or the citizens we serve versus on ourselves. So an example in Utah, if you haven't been to Utah, you should come. It's so beautiful. We have beautiful mountains, but we have a desert too. We're a very, very dry state. We don't get a lot of water. And there was an agency that was doing a lot of public relation campaigns to get people to conserve water. They called it slow the flow, use less water. Sounds great, except for water in Utah is very, very cheap. It's subsidized through a bunch of revenue. And so you could sit there and listen to the nice little advertisement to not use water, but when it's really cheap, people are going to use it. And what happens is it shifts the burden onto our employees. Hey, you guys just don't have enough knowledge. You just don't have enough knowledge. I'll give you the knowledge, and now you're accountable for doing your job. When we as management start with, I need to be responsible for my job, which is to make sure my employees can be successful. And it's not just pushing the burden to them by more knowledge, but I design a process for them that they can be successful. And that's a whole discussion. When we do that, then we actually make it easy for people to do their jobs naturally and intuitively. Think in Utah, if the water usage matched the cost of water, people would naturally use less. That's harder to do though, right? It's harder to get people to, you know, change your tax structure and all that stuff. That's harder. It's easy. It gives us the illusion of progress that we're doing something because we put out a campaign. And so it's training and communication. There's a time and place for that, but it's after you fix the problem that's blocking people from doing what they would do naturally and intuitively. Then you can amplify your solution and cement it and fine tune it with training and communication, but not rely on it as the primary means of changing somebody's behavior.
Okay, one more question, which is
Sure.
the money problem that you talk about today is one sees a lot of that with respect to young digital businesses where new enterprises want to spend and onboard customers very, very quickly because they worry that competition will catch up. again, how do you decide how much money is enough when the outcomes are intangible?
It's a really good question. We need another session just on that one. And I'm very sensitive to this because being over the budget for the governor, there is a time and place when you need more money. There's no doubt about it. But we want to first ask ourselves this. So here's the mindset we have. When we first jump to more money, we assume that what we're doing is already good enough, that we've done everything we can with the resources we have. So let's say you're trying to onboard customers and in this digital, highly competitive environment. The question is, have you identified, this is how I would approach it. Do you understand what the pain point is for the customer? Because it's really fun for us to push our idea on the customer and how great our stuff is. But this is just an example.
Sure. I guess we have pretty much run out of time. Thank you, Kristen. It was absolutely wonderful interacting with you, and I'm sure everybody present in this discussion would have benefited from your talk. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you all the participants and, of course, IDFC First Bank, who are partners in this Masterclass Leading Edge 2021. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. A pleasure.